Hey, everybody. Welcome to Altabanking, a podcast presented by Altabank, where we talk about various topical and important things that impact Utah and Utahns. I'm really excited today because those of you who are regular listeners and viewers, you notice that it's more than just two of us. We have a panel here today, a panel of experts, and we are going to talk about the Great Salt Lake. And we're going to talk about issues that are impacting the lake and how issues around the lake can impact all of us around the state. And then what sorts of things we can do with respect to doing our part to help preserve the lake and the ecosystem around it. Starting at the far end of the table, Natalie Gochnour. In the middle here is Bonnie Baxter, and then Max Malmquist. I'm not going to steal any more thunder, but just ask you to go ahead and introduce yourselves. So, Max, you want to go first?
Yeah, my name's Max Malmquist. I'm the engagement manager for National Audubon Society's Saline Lakes program. Our program started in 2017, and our mission or vision is healthy saline lake ecosystems with reliable water supplies to sustain both birds and people.
Great. Yeah. Bonnie?
I am Dr. Bonnie Baxter, and I'm a professor of biology and a director of Great Salt Lake Institute, both of those at Westminster University. And I have been studying Great Salt Lake for 25 years with my students. And Great Salt Lake Institute, its mission is to connect people to the lake through education and research.
Great. Yeah, Natalie.
Hi, happy to join you today, Stan. Natalie Gochnour. I lead the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. It's at the University of Utah, part of the David Eccles School of Business. And one of the things that the Gardner Institute does is helps translate things that happen on campus into the community. And I've been a contributor to the Great Salt Lake Strike Team over the past year.
Yeah. Great, yeah. So it's going to be a fun conversation. Again, those of you who are sort of regulars know that it's going to be wide-ranging, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. So let's kind of jump into it. I'm going to toss this out, and would love to get everybody's opinions on this first one. We had a fantastic winter. I think probably we all skied our hearts out. I know you did because we saw each other up at Snow Basin, but we got an amazing snowpack, and that of course has led to increases in level of the lake. We have the church donating the 20,000 acre of water back to the lake. I wonder if that's given us a bit of a false sense of security here. Maybe we can talk about that. What exactly the snowpack's done, and what the water grant has done, and what that means in real terms for us.
So we're up a little more than 5 feet, and we'll go down 3 feet with evaporative loss in the summer. So that's the average over the last couple of years, has been almost 3 feet of loss. And so really we'll be up 2.5 feet by the end of the year, by the low point in the year. And that takes us back to the elevation that we saw in like 2021, which is when we actually hit a historic low where we were breaking records. So it's still not great. And just to put that in a framework that folks can understand, after we hit the lowest low last November, we needed 11 feet gain in order to get the lake to a happy place for the biology. So we really are still in dire need of water. And the way I like to think about it is take that robust snow year and think about how many of those we need to get 11 feet gain. And that's not likely to happen if it's a once in a lifetime kind of snow year. So that means that we've got to do something other than depend on Mother Nature. So I'll just throw that out, but you guys take other parts of that question.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a concern. Thinking about the legislative session, I think there were a number of folks who thought maybe they didn't do quite enough, and maybe that was part of it, that we had this amazing snow year. But it seems like the messaging it's coming from our elected officials, and I think people understand that the snowpack, yes, it's given us, I know people throw out like 2 years before we might get back to where we were. And I think, it's important for us to keep our foot on the pedal and ensure that, we over the last 2 years, the legislature actually has done quite a bit, I think, to help the lake, and created a toolkit. But we need to use this time that we've been given with the snowpack to make sure that we can start using or implementing those tools.
Yeah. You do hear a lot of the criticism. Legislature should do more. I'm not sure what more they could have done or what more people are expecting. Natalie, I know you've got a pretty good beat on what's going on up on the Hill during the session and otherwise. Maybe give a quick recap of all of the, some of the big achievements that have taken place, at least in the last session.
Sure. I mean, I follow what Bonnie and Max are saying in terms of that this was a gift, what we got. And I don't know anybody who's looked at this closely that thinks anything other than this was a gift that we have to go capitalize on.
Yeah.
So I have never seen an issue on Capitol Hill where the leaders of both parties have turned on a dime like they have on this issue. So that's saying a lot, because there's a lot of really important issues in transportation and tax policy and education. But they rallied on Great Salt Lake and continue to do that. And I believe the commitment is genuine, and they have done some, taken some significant steps.
Yeah, I agree, and I do wish that more people recognized the full extent of what they've done thus far.
Stan, it might be worth, and Bonnie and Max can help me here, because I don't have them all imprinted to memory, but they put Brian Steed in charge of the Great Salt Lake, gave a single individual who's charged with a stewardship for the lake.
Is that HB 310 from this year? I can't, the Great Salt Lake Commissioner bill?
Big deal.
Yeah.
And Brian is incredibly talented, very experienced. He's the former head of the Department of Natural Resources. He was at once the acting director of the BLM for our country. He knows he's a PhD economist. He knows the issues. A lot of money, and I think, Bonnie, you would know that, maybe the numbers a little better than I do, but they've put a lot of money towards the lake.
Yeah.
They've changed policies in terms of water rights and put in place a lot of investment in secondary water metering that helps us have ways to conserve more.
Yeah.
Put a lot of money towards agricultural optimization. Bonnie, I'm sure you have more, specifics on it, but the listeners, viewers should really understand that we're serious when we say that this state is, on the beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you could speak to the Enhancement Trust, but I can run down some of the other ones that came from 2022 legislature. I mean, one of the most interesting things to me as a person who didn't grow up in the West is how Western water law is governed by such antiquated legislation. And this idea that, you have to spill all your water on a fallow field or you lose your water right is something that is not meant for the West, where we really should be conserving our water. And so what happens is state legislatures have to basically make laws that circumvent these old water laws. And so a lot of that happened in 2022. And so there is no longer this use it or lose it thing in Utah. You can lease your water rights to the state for the beneficial use of Great Salt Lake. And beneficial use was another thing that was characterized as water used for housing development or agriculture, but not for something like sovereign lands like Great Salt Lake. So that had to be circumvented in water law. And this metering, secondary metering, so farmers don't know how much water they're using. Water's delivered via a canal, and you're allowed to water on Wednesdays, if that's your water right. That's not a volume Wednesdays, right? Yeah. So this is going to take a while to roll out, and so the concern is these meters won't be put in time. But that would give people in agriculture the ability to measure how much water they're using, and then these other pieces of legislation would allow folks to then lease the water that they don't need back to the state in order to get it to Great Salt Lake. So I think some of that was just genius in terms of putting together policies that can tiptoe around these antiquated water laws. But the Enhancement Trust was a really special one, and you should speak to that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, too. I mean, you think of the politics here in Utah. We now have the most flexible in-stream water law in the West, which I think is pretty incredible. But yes, I think I can't remember the bill number, HB 410 maybe?
410.
That established the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust and Audubon and the Nature Conservancy. We applied and accepted that grant, that funding. It's $40 million. 30 million of that is supposed to go towards water transactions, and then 10 million is supposed to help with hydrology, wetland restoration, infrastructure improvement, so that we can get more water to the lake. Believe it or not, the distribution systems that we have created, of course, because of human beings for beneficial use of water, it's pretty tricky in some of these places to get water to the lake because our infrastructure has been basically created to prevent that, right? So that, I think, is thinking about the future and how we continue to get more water to the lake. I think improving our infrastructure is going to be very helpful, and the trust is I think next week we're putting out grant applications so that people can start or applying for the $10 million in wetland restoration funds.
So we've talked a little bit about the water law, obviously, and we talked, about agriculture, of course. And, I'd mentioned before we got started that I wanted to be sure that we talked a little bit about the role that our agriculture industry has to play and the impact, the positive impact that they can have. And of course, I think people do understand, but we should reiterate the negative impact as things, as the lake itself continues to get stressed. Let's start with the positive, though. I know that, Nature Conservancy is not here, but I know from our work with them that they partner really closely with the farmers and the ranchers around the state to collaborate on solutions for how to more effectively use water. Maybe one of you can talk a little bit more about some of those partnerships, some of the things that have maybe begun to be discussed around that. And then we can sort of extend that to the overall role that we know that our farmers and ranchers can take in helping with these efforts.
I mean, a starting point is just trying to get the data right. So help me here, Bonnie and Max. I believe of the water uses in our state, somewhere north of 70% is going to agriculture.
Yes.
So that's a place you have to pay attention to.
Right.
And I think the other statistic that sticks with me is that the lake's reduction in size, which has gone down about an average of 5 feet since the high of 1986, 5 feet per year. That reduction in size, I think 80% of that is due to draws from agriculture. So that's the other statistic that's kind of interesting in terms of water that specifically should come into the lake that doesn't.
Yeah. And then you've got these issues about having self-sufficiency, being able to feed ourselves, having food that we need. You have obviously the economic impact that agriculture is in certain communities. I will say, getting our numbers right at the state level, agriculture is a very small sector in our state. But if I go into certain counties and communities, it's a large sector. And there's also the customs that come with it, the lifestyle that comes with it that people value. So I don't know the answer here. I do know, and you've said this, Stan, that any work that policymakers do with agriculture, if it's done in a partnership way rather than an adversarial way, that's the right way. That's the Utah way to try to resolve some of these things. Yeah. So where's their common ground? And I think there's a lot of common ground in using water more wisely. And how do we do that? Is it different types of irrigation techniques? Is it changing crops? Is it sometimes not having a crop? Certainly the water law changes are huge.
Yeah, they're huge.
Huge.
They're huge.
And so I think the right thing for the audience to think about is how do we work with agriculture to help be a part of the solution rather than point fingers at agriculture.
Agreed.
Right.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a couple of things to say, but I know that you
know,
deal more directly with.
Well, and my role, we actually, just this week he's starting, we've hired a new person who's going to be on the ground working with water rights holders and ag users. And so that's not my role, but I just wanted to add, add to the complexity of this issue too is, there's in the lower Bear River, for example, there's flood irrigation is a common irrigation practice, and it provides a lot of really good habitat for birds, sandhill cranes, tundra swans, snow geese, white-faced ibis, and there's return flows that come from that that go to the lake. And so, it's not, we've got to be really careful about, it's not all about conservation in certain situations. And one of the other issues is, I think, I've heard that ag users, it's like, well, if I conserve water, how do I know that it actually is going to make it to the lake? Yeah. And I think Natalie touched on this, and Bonnie, but, actually metering the water, having the monitoring infrastructure to ensure that the water actually gets to the lake is something that we need to work on right away, and we are working on.
Yeah.
Stan, on that point, though, I want to double underline it. So my background's economics. I think a lot about how markets can help solve, public issues. I grew up in Salt Lake County. My water's always been metered. Whether I use it inside or outside, always been metered. If you grew up in Davis and Weber County, chances are your outdoor watering's not metered.
Right.
You pay a set fee, right? So that's a real problem, because you provide no incentive for people to conserve. So when we say secondary water metering, what we're talking about is going into every one of those homes that don't have secondary metering and making a connection.
Right.
I think how time intensive that is and how expensive that is.
Yeah.
I don't know the latest expenditure number, but the last one that I was familiar with was a $260 million spent by the state for secondary water metering. I wish they would have done this from the start. It would have been a lot less expensive, but that's not the world we're in.
Right.
And so we're going in and making these connections. They found that if you just measure water, people consume less. And then, of course, if you price it, they'll consume even less. So I have a neighbor, I went and visited her, and she said, I'm only going to water twice a week now. I said, really? And this, I wasn't talking about water. That was on her mind. She said, I used to do it 3 times, but Murray City raised the price, and it's too expensive. I'm going to cut back to 2. Just think what a huge reduction that is.
Yes.
There must be a field of psychology
Yeah.
that deals with these economic issues, because I keep saying we need psychologists at the table with Great Salt Lake and sociologists, because there is something about seeing a measurement or seeing a price that affects your psychology and affects your behavior.
Yeah,
I
well,
find it
economics
fascinating.
offers a lot here, because they always say that all of economics can be reduced to like 4 words. People respond to incentives. And then they say the rest is just color commentary.
I love that.
But
that.
so my neighbor is responding to that incentive,
Yeah.
Yes,
and it's you don't have to do a whole lot. You just have to price things correctly. Now it doesn't solve every problem, but if you don't meter, you can't even price.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up about agriculture, and I very rarely hear this anymore, but I used to hear people say a lot, a drop of water that makes it to Great Salt Lake is a drop of water wasted. And it brings to the point about the value of a drop of water. And some people say to me, well, why should I stop watering my lawn? Because municipal water use is like not a part of it. It's a smaller part of the problem. Agriculture is using all the water, so why should I stop watering my lawn? And the way someone explained it to me once has really stuck with me, which is that drop of water has less benefit. It's low-hanging fruit to get rid of watering your grass. But a drop of water that goes to a crop could provide food for, say, cattle that then could feed people. And I've also heard farmers say, well, my water feeds people. And so there's a stronger value on my water. So if you take that drop of water and you think, what is the benefit of a drop of water that gets to Great Salt Lake if we've got this low value on the drop of water for grass and the high value on the drop of water for agriculture? And the truth is, a lot of food is made from Great Salt Lake. It's almost as indirect as shipping alfalfa to China, because brine shrimp cysts are harvested and they are used in aquaculture of fish. And the Artemia industry says that 60% of fish that humans eat have been fed Great Salt Lake brine shrimp cyst. So we are feeding people with water from Great Salt Lake, and also potash fertilizer that's made from Great Salt Lake. So vegetarians like me, I don't eat fish, but I do eat nuts. So those nut trees are being grown with fertilizer from Great Salt Lake. So I think that's a really important concept to get across, is that the benefit of a drop of water for Great Salt Lake has a very similar value to the benefit of a drop of water in agriculture in our state. And the other point I wanted to make was I was invited to speak at an emergency meeting of the Utah Farm Bureau when things got so bad with Great Salt Lake last fall. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, well, we want to hear about the biology of Great Salt Lake and how everything's going. And so I said, okay, I'll talk to you about it. And what's cool is that farmers are biologists. And so the biology discussion was relevant and interesting. The questions were fantastic. And we really understood each other. But one of the things they were very, very interested in is how the food chains were going and what birds have the potential to get an Endangered Species Act listing in the future. Like, which birds should we be looking at? And they were asking really relevant questions. And that matters because if that happens, then federal law would override water rights. And I think that maybe is a fear of that community. And so having the ability to do something like lease your water rights back to the state in a situation that was as dire as where we were last fall, it's just an interesting conversation. And so I find it very engaging to talk to people in agriculture and hear their thoughts, because it makes me think a little more deeply about my work.
Yeah. The one thing that I'll add to that and share with that is, on a previous one of these podcasts, we had a customer of ours who works really closely with all of the farmers in Cache Valley, and I do mean that literally. He and his company provide the majority of the farm equipment that they use, and we got into a conversation about how farmers innovate and how a lot of technology that's out there, farmers have adapted and advanced for their own use, GPSs and how they do that, and sort of how they use that to deal with fertilizer and what to plant where, and even watering and all. And I think it's important for the folks that are listening and watching to understand that, right? They're biologists. This guest said they're stewards of the land, and they do tend to think in a very innovative manner. And I suspect that there is a lot of innovation that they will begin to bring, if they haven't already, to this particular question, right? How can we use our water more efficiently? How can we be sure that we are, that we're taking full advantage of the opportunities that are here, right? So anyway, but I wanted to be sure to add that, because I do think that they're getting a little bit of there's certainly that small but very vocal reactionary group that says, oh, we should just stop farming entirely. Stop growing alfalfa. Well, besides just being impractical, I could go on. I'm not going to go on that one. When we talk about the ecosystem and then we talk about economics, those two things are directly related. Bonnie, you just mentioned the fact that, the amount of brine shrimp, the percentage of fish that we eat that have been fed brine shrimp, and the potash industry. They have other industries that are based around the lake. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the ecosystem impact that could take place there, and then extend that into the economic impact for the entire state.
Yeah, we'd be looking at a few $1 billion if we lost these industries, and adding lithium into that and including the ski and tourism industry makes that even higher, that number even higher. This would have profound economic impacts for the state of Utah to lose the mineral extraction companies, which includes sodium chloride, our regular salt, and it includes potash, this fertilizer. It includes magnesium, which is used in steel and aluminum. So if you have an aluminum can in your house right now, it probably has metal from Great Salt Lake. The next largest supplier of magnesium is in China. So part of this is national security as well. There's now a lithium mining operation, and that's under exploration as well. So there, of course, is a nearby copper mine, and I like to take my students out to the lake and point to where the magnesium is being extracted and where the copper mine is, and tell them if they don't like seeing the industry, then they should throw their phones in the lake, because we're all using the products that actually are coming from the lake and the surrounding hills. And so I think it's really important that we as humans understand this conflict. So that is huge economically. Now we've got lake effect snow that comes from when storms pass over Great Salt Lake. Yep. And Mackenzie Skiles is a professor at the University of Utah in atmospheric sciences who studies this lake effect and dust landing on the snow and causing some problems with melting. And she says that even if the lake effect snow is not that great, that the advertising from lake effect snow, back to psychology, is really important. And so even, we like to say it's about 20% of the snowpack. In some years it might only be 5%, but people think about that snow as lake effect snow, and that does some good advertising for the state. So you can even go beyond the industries that happen in the lake. To tourism, we have the Great Salt Lake Bird Festival. People come out here to see certain species of birds. They come from all over the world because this is the best place to see certain birds. So there could be quite a large economic impact if we were to lose the lake. And I won't even get started on the dust and the real estate market and industry, but that's bad too.
Not yet, but we can talk about that.
Yeah.
You can talk about that one too. Yeah. One of the things that I sometimes hear is the view that of all the impacts we just talked about there, but those are really just constrained to the Wasatch Front. But it's not, right? I mean, it's the entire state, and even a little bit of our friends to the west, in across into Nevada. So maybe we can talk about some of these broader impacts just a little bit, and what people should be aware of as they think about, going the north part of the state, going in the south part of the state, et cetera, and how there may be impacts there.
Yeah, Stan, I think what I would add there, I think Bonnie covered the economics of the lake really well. And I want to just add that when I think about the lake, I think of human health because of the dust. And Bonnie, you could explain that better than I can, but dangerous metals get in the air that we breathe into our lungs. I think of the economic impact, so described from the lakeside industries or the tourism industry and whatnot. And then I think of the biology or the ecological health.
Yeah.
Interestingly, all of us, to differing degrees, value all parts of those components, right? We value our health. If you love birds, you value that. And the idea is that we have these things that we value that we can actually do something about. So it inspires action. Now you ask, you were sort of saying, is this a statewide issue? Am I right? Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah.
Anything that's a Salt Lake City issue is a statewide issue. This is our capital city.
Right.
It's the gateway to our state. It's the financial center, the seat of government, the warehousing and distribution center, things coming in and out.
Yeah.
It's where our international airport is. I study migration data a lot. I mean, if you look at St. George, Washington County, and what portion of that population has ties to the Wasatch Front, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
And if you're in parts of rural Utah, a lot of your things are coming and leaving, imports, exports through the home here, meaning the center here in Salt Lake City. So I'm not a believer that we can break up the state into pieces and you have an interest here, but you don't have an interest here. We are absolutely connected as commuter sheds, as centers, of commerce going back and forth. If you're off of the Wasatch Front and your child needs medical care, you're going to come to Primary Children's.
Right.
But quick, right?
Right.
If you have cancer, you're going to be at Huntsman Cancer Institute. If you're on the Wasatch Front and you're just needing to be out in the open skies, you're going to go to the San Rafael Swell. You're going to go to Bluff. So anyway, we are just so incredibly integrated, and I think it's really a disservice to try and take most of our public policy issues and try and divide them up.
Yeah.
We're very connected.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad to hear you say that, and it it does bear almost continual reemphasizing, right? Because we do tend to think about ourselves regionally. It's easy to think about ourselves regionally, but an issue like this, I think, highlights that it's no, it is literally one big community.
In economics, we have a rule that if you're a single media market, you're probably a single economic region. So think of Utah, right?
Right.
If you're in Southwest Utah, you have some ties to Las Vegas. If you're in Moab, you have some ties to Grand Junction.
Right.
But for the most part, we're a single
It's
media
all right
market.
here. Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly right.
Can I just want to add, and I think you guys both covered that very well, but thinking of the impacts beyond Utah, Bonnie talked about potash and magnesium and some of these really important minerals that are, I think, going to help us fight climate change if we want to, become electrified. Lithium right now is one of the solutions. Of course, copper is in everyone's house and cell phone, and so I agree that Great Salt Lake, the brine shrimp cysts that are shipped all around the world, it's a global issue, in my opinion. I mean, it's going to affect everyone.
Good point. Good point.
One other way to say that, I was interacting with President Taylor Randall, the president of the University of Utah, and he, did this tour of the state when he first became president, did a visit to Great Salt Lake, saw the value of taking our universities, connecting them together, thinking more purposefully about the lake, bringing together those interests with state agencies. But we started saying this notion that we don't work on very many public policies that are hemispheric.
Yeah.
So you two will both get that. But, we work on all sorts of things on Capitol Hill in public policy that are really significant, but it's very rare when it crosses hemispheres.
Well, speaking of that, I'd love for Max to wax poetic on the hemispheric importance of the Saline Lakes corridor in the West, and Great Salt Lake holds a really special place because it's so big, but those birds need to migrate and they need to travel and they need to eat. So what happens if Great Salt Lake dries up? What happens hemispherically to birds?
Yeah, right. And I could go on all day about this, but I think one good specific example, one of the two birds, in my opinion, that kind of symbolize Great Salt Lake is the Wilson's phalarope. And this is a little shorebird. It weighs about the same as 2 AAA batteries. They breed around Great Salt Lake in freshwater wetlands. They breed up into Canada and Saskatchewan. And they come here right now, July. They kind of peak at the end of July, and they feed primarily on brine flies. And we've had 500,000, 600,000, 30 to 40% of the entire global population comes and stages at Great Salt Lake. And they take advantage of the super abundant food resource in brine flies. And they fatten up, double, triple their body weight, and we don't know this for sure, but we think that they fly directly nonstop from here to other saline lakes in South America. One that we know for sure is Laguna Marjiquita in Argentina, which is a saline lake that is actually fairly comparable in size to Great Salt Lake. And those birds overwinter there. And so, it is this kind of really unique hemispheric connection that we have. And these birds heavily rely on saline lakes for most of their annual cycle.
So, for the folks that might be listening that kind of scratch their heads and go, okay, but why? I mean, that's great for the birds, but there is a bigger environmental impact here, right? I mean, that these birds help to contribute to. I mean, Nick, talk a little bit about that.
Well, so I think what you kind of get, biodiversity is really important. And, I think we need to do everything that we've already lost so many species. And, especially these species that are so highly adapted to a specific environment. Bonnie was talking about the potential for an ESA listing or something. I think in my mind that is enough for me to really care about these phalaropes and ensure that we're doing everything we can to protect them. Your question.
No. You're doing no. This is great. It's again the kind of the point is that there are people out there, and I've talked to people that. Yeah, they think it's great that we get, birds that are migrating through or birds that are, sort of stopping and, fattening up and then migrating on. And then they kind of think, but, if they don't, am I really losing anything? Like, what's the, what's the point, right? I don't know that there is this real awareness of the connectivity of the system, so to speak.
Right. And, there are partners that are working on that right now. Laguna Marjiquita actually 1 year ago became a national park. They're working to protect that lake. Of course, so national parks in South America have like the highest level of protection that you can have. It's very different here.
Yeah.
Not saying that's even a good idea at Great Salt Lake. But we are working on connecting communities and, the people that live in Laguna Marjiquita when they have those phalaropes down there. We share these birds, and I think people are very aware of that. There's Aves Argentinas. They're doing a lot of good work down in South America. The Manamet, or Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, they have staff that are doing surveys of Wilson's phalaropes all over in South America, including Laguna Marjiquita. And we're connecting and we're sharing information and trying to collect better data so that we really do understand those connections and how we share those birds.
I think that's an awesome way to talk about that, about linking the birds along this corridor, this flyway, and that is a long way to travel. That is a long way to travel. But one of the things that I think is crisis level is that a lot of these saline lakes in the West and in the world are disappearing.
Right.
And the story is very similar if you look at the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan, or you look at Lake Urmia in Iran, or you look at the Salton Sea. The story is kind of the same. First come the water diversions, largely for agriculture, and now we're reaching these pressures of climate change where we're getting more evaporation, higher temperatures, less water in the form of snow, this year excluded. But that's happening all over. And so where are these birds going to go? I mean, it really is the demise of a species if this lake goes away. This is the biggest and most important lake on that flyway.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that too. I mean, I gave the example of Wilson's phalaropes, but there are a lot of species that depend on Great Salt Lake.
338.
And I have, for Ella's sake, Ella Sorensen, one of my colleagues, that number, it includes Great Salt Lake, the adjacent wetlands and adjacent uplands as well. Yeah. But that's something that we're very concerned about. People ask me all the time, how are the birds doing at Great Salt Lake? And having an actual tangible report or the data to show what's happening with the birds, we don't really have that. Audubon, we did a analysis with the Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program and Division of Wildlife Resources. And they've been collecting data on birds at Great Salt Lake, their Great Salt Lake Waterbird Survey, starting in 1996, and they're continuing today. And we did an analysis a couple years ago that basically looked at a 21-year data set, 1996 to 2017, so excluding the last 4 years when we were really hit hard by drought. And what that analysis showed was that the bird numbers at Great Salt Lake were stable or increasing. And we've got to be very careful about how we think about that, because Great Salt Lake provides such high-quality habitat, and we're losing all these other habitats in the region, in the West.
Yeah.
And so Great Salt Lake might be becoming more important for birds. And even overall, if their numbers are dropping, if they're concentrating more at Great Salt Lake, it might look like they're stable or increasing, but that might not necessarily be the case.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting, and it's sort of an overpopulation. I mean, I'm going to super simplify it, but it's almost an overpopulation problem, right? That we could be creating.
Because the eared grebes used to eat at Salton Sea, and now they moved here, right? Their places are going away, and so more of them come here.
Right.
Yeah.
Stan, another way to think of this is to remember what we've heard our elected leaders say, and I'm paraphrasing, and forgive me if I don't get it quite right, but several of them, including Governor Cox, have said, not on our watch.
Yeah.
Not on my watch. Is this right, Bonnie?
Yeah.
This is how
Yeah.
you remember it.
Yeah.
We have a stewardship. This lake, whatever part of it you value, if it's the economics, if it's the human health, if it's the ecology, if it's all of it together, the system, this is our time when we're the keepers of this flame. And then it's not that hard to take careful actions that improve it.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
And look what we're doing.
Yeah, I love that idea of stewardship.
So, and I think that's deep in our DNA, and I think this
Yeah.
state can figure that out. So we shouldn't be flippant about it. We shouldn't point fingers. We should get about doing the things that prevent and solve problems.
I think that's one of the most important things about the LDS Church's donation of water rights. While that amount of water might be a drop in the bucket, so to speak, of the 2 million acre feet we need to get per year. In 2021, it was 800,000 acre feet. Don't ask me what an acre feet is. I measure in microliters, so I have a hard time with that. But that's the measurement of water coming through a system. And so if you think we got to get from 800,000 to 2 million a year, that's really different, right? That's more than doubling what is normally coming into the system. And even with this banner water year, I can't remember did we get 1.5 million acre feet, 1.2?
Oh, shoot, I don't know.
I can't remember. Anyway, of course we got up, above 800, but we still didn't get the number that we need to make the increases that we need to get to make up for that 11 feet loss. So their number of acre feet is a small drop in that bucket, but the symbolic gesture of stewardship, pointing at what you were saying, I think that's really important to say we are leaders among lots of people here in the state of Utah, and we would like to stand up for the donation of these stranded water rights. Like, we should donate them to the lake, and they donated them in perpetuity. So if that continues, and we have talked with folks in the sustainability office at the LDS Church, and one of the things that they're working on is their landscaping and incorporating more xeriscaping. And, there are a lot of green lawns at wards in Salt Lake City. And so to see that being different is a really important symbol for doing the right thing for stewardship. And it fits very nicely within the belief system of people who belong to that church, as they feel as they are stewards for the earth. So I think that what you're saying about people feeling like they're part of the solution, it is a very Utah thing. I think that I can see that all around. When I travel back east to where I'm from, I don't meet people who go outside every day. People in Utah spend a lot of time outside. We value the out of doors. We value nature. And that's not true everywhere. So I think it's really important to underscore that this stewardship is something that we value as a state with 5 national parks, and that we're proud of.
Yeah. You mentioned, and I want to be sure that we hit this. I know that we're going to start to run a little short on time, but I want to be sure that we touch on this. We talked earlier about metering and the effect that has on people's water usage. And Bonnie, you just mentioned xeriscaping. I just, patting myself on the back, we xeriscaped our yard last year immediately before it snowed and didn't quite kill everything. But anyway, that's a digression. What are other things, though, that, some simple things, right? If you're going to make the commitment to xeriscape, for example, that can be a sizable commitment, right, in terms of time and disruption and money. But what are some other maybe much simpler things that we can remind people to do?
Take a shorter shower.
Yeah.
I've been collecting ideas. sent to me by mostly retired people who have more time than I do, I think, and they've been sending me emails and leaving me voicemails, and it's just so fun to listen to people's stories and telling me what they are doing to save the lake. And it's actually just so beautiful. And one of the things that an elderly gentleman who's upwards of 90 told me that he's doing for the lake is he is not flushing his toilet, except once a day. Once a day he flushes his toilet. And I thought it was the sweetest thing, that like, oh, you're doing that for me. I really appreciate that. But I just think it's wonderful. But I had another friend tell me, when I run the water to start my shower, the water isn't hot right away, and I waste all this water that's just running down the drain. And so I've started collecting it in a bucket, and I use that to water my plants. So just, I think being conscious of water use, and I don't want to forget to say that the reason so much legislation has passed is people have been talking to the representatives. And that sounds so cliche to say call your representative, but it has made a difference. I've seen it. I've talked to legislators. They are hearing from constituents night and day, and I think we need to keep our voices held high because they want to know what you think.
Yeah.
I think those are all great. I'm going to be more philosophical for just a minute. I think we're in a new environment here in Utah. We're a mid-sized state. We're a multicultural state. We're getting more of our growth from the outside than the inside. We have this elite economy that truly has performed at a premium level for some time. So given that we're a new Utah, I think people need to be prepared to change. I think people need to keep an open mind. I think people need to listen more. I think we have to be willing to invest more. And I think we have to unify. And those are pretty philosophical things, but no matter what the issue is, that's really good advice for almost any public policy right now. Because we hit an inflection point, came out of a pandemic. We jumped 4 states in population size from 2010 to 2020. In the pandemic, our drop was 7% in jobs. The nation's was 14%. We popped out more quickly. This is an amazing place. But we've got the issues we need to go work on. So let's be prepared to change, to listen, to invest, and to unify.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So, so we hear a lot about the risk on dust. In the lake, as the lake dries up, we get this we get more dust beginning to blow up in the atmosphere, et cetera. I mean, let's talk about what that really means.
So we have a history of mining in the West, and gold mining leads to atmospheric mercury. And I think when that mercury floats over Great Salt Lake, the chemistry with these little sodium and chloride ions floating over the lake allows it to make a soluble form of mercury, and that gets in the water. And so on the bottom of the lake, we have some mercury that's been turned into its biological form. And brine flies in particular that pupate down there can accumulate this mercury, and birds can possibly eat it. So that's been studied in the lake for about 15 years. And so now, as the lake has been in decline and drying up, we're worried about, for example, mercury in this dust that's blowing around from these exposed lake shores. And there's also natural arsenic that comes out of these mountains, and that also is notably in the dust. And there also is selenium, which is a byproduct of copper mining. So some of the metals are natural, some of them are from mining, and all of them are embedded in that sediment around the lake. So we're concerned about the dust events we've been seeing, and it's not just the particulates, which are bad enough for human health, but also these heavy metals that might be blowing around.
All right, so we are about out of time, but before we go, and boy, there are probably a dozen topics that we didn't touch on. Maybe it'd be fun to get together again. But I kind of want to just offer up for parting thoughts.
Yeah, I grew up in Holiday here in Salt Lake, and I was telling you guys before the show that I really didn't experience the lake growing up, and the first time I was out there was on a field trip in 6th grade, and we went swimming, and our teacher was very upset with us because we got the bus all salty. But, I would, if you experience Great Salt Lake just kind of on the surface, it's smelly, the bugs, I would encourage people to get out and spend some time at the lake. I mean, I spend a lot of time out there, and every day I go out there, there's something new to see. The vistas are beautiful, sunsets, sunrises, the birds, of course, which I love. There's things that you can see on Great Salt Lake you can't see anywhere else in the world. And you can't really love something unless you take the time and spend the time with it. So my parting note would just be, for the listeners out there, take some time and go experience Great Salt Lake.
That's great.
I love that. I think one of the things I'm hearing from people, and even from my students, is just that they didn't realize how much the lake was a part of them until it was threatened. And I've heard that from so many people who grew up here. And I did not grow up here, but I grew up near the ocean and spending time in the water and on boats and with birds. And I think I was drawn to Great Salt Lake as this magical place. And I could never understand it when people had this torturous relationship here with the lake. And honestly, I think it comes from living beside a lake in a desert that taunts you and says, I'm not going to give you fresh water or fish. I think I could see it's a little salty, right? Yeah, I could see how people would grow up a little angry at the lake. But as long as humans have been in Utah, which is about 13,000 years, as I understand it, they have lived alongside Great Salt Lake, and they have loved and hated it. And I think that it is such a remarkable place with remarkable treasures, and every single day I go there, like Max said, it's something different to offer. It looks different, it smells different, there's a different vista, I see a different bird, I find a different salt crystal or megarabelite crystal, or, it's the most amazing place. Yeah.
Natalie.
Stan, I don't know how to top those two. I really don't. I mean, those are, that's a beautiful thing. And I grew up here. Yeah. And I understand what you're saying. Those all make sense to me. Maybe just a closing thought for me would be, the eyes of the world are on us. People are watching. This is big international news.
Yeah.
And if we can turn the corner on this and put it back together, because I think we have been behind the curve to let it get to where it got. But if we can put the pieces back together, that will reflect very well upon our state. And I think it'll give us the confidence and the chutzpah or whatever to show that we do really tough things, and maybe we can go do other hard things. Because this is really, my understanding in working with all of the technical experts on this, we can fix this problem. Let's go do it.
Yeah. I think that's a great note to end on. So, I want to thank you, Max and Bonnie and Natalie. This is fantastic conversation. We could have gone on, I think, for another hour or so. I've got a whole list of stuff that I didn't even get to ask about so maybe it will be a repeat performance. But I do want to thank you, and for anybody that is listening or watching and wants to learn more, there are a bunch of different resources out there. Offer up a few. I know the coalition's got a great website.
Great Salt Lake Institute. We have an educator's resources link on our website. So if you just Google Great Salt Lake Institute at Westminster University, there's a great set of links with resources and talks that we've given and field trip guides and so forth. So I think that's a fun place for anyone to go.
Yeah.
I would say, well, number one, if you do want to contribute to the Great Salt Lake Watershed Enhancement Trust, our website is gslwatertrust.org. And we also, our National Audubon Society Saline Lakes program is part of our Western Water Initiative, and you can check out our website at audubon.org/Western Water.
Great. Yeah.
Great.
Any-
I help with the Great Salt Lake Strike Team. You can find that information at gardner.utah.edu.
Fantastic. Yeah, go read up and don't be shy about contacting people and asking questions either, because I know that everybody that's involved with this issue is more than happy to talk about it, answer questions, and everything else. I certainly have not had anybody tell me no whenever I've wanted to have conversations about the lake. So that'll do it for us again. Can't say it enough. Thank you to our panel. And thank you all for listening to and watching Altabanking. We will be back with another panel discussion here shortly. And don't forget to subscribe to Altabanking wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. We'll see you again.